Last week, Joey was on the podcast to help us go all in on the 2022 season for the Dallas Cowboys. And this week, he's back for us to blow it all up here on the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. I am your host, Landon McCool. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And I am joined today by special guest Joey Ickes, back from joining us last week with Marcus. But this time, instead of going all in on the 2022 season, Joey and I are going to discuss blowing this whole thing up. So first off, Joey, I know last week when Marcus asked you if the Cowboys should go all in, your answer was obvious. Having known you for so long, the answer, of course, is always, every year. Right. So I guess my first question here is, do you think a soft reboot or whatever we're going to call this exercise is a good idea? And just to kind of lay out the parameters real quick, I basically told Joey he could do whatever he wanted with the roster, but just to make it realistic, obviously Dak has got to stay around because we have a pretty strong commitment to him. So do you think that doing this is a terrible idea? I mean, based on what you're telling us, that you think going all in every year is a good idea?
Yeah, so I think franchises sort of exist in one of two states, right? They either have a quarterback that they feel like they can win a championship with, or they don't feel like they have a quarterback they can win a championship with. Yeah. And so if you have a quarterback you feel like you can win with, you should pretty much be trying to win one of those championships every single year that you have that quarterback, because you just never know how many of those opportunities you're going to have. I mean, how many people after the 2014 season thought Tony Romo will never see the playoffs again for the rest of his career, or that we would only see Tony Romo play 5 more games for the rest of his career, something like that, after, walking off the field in Lambeau? You just never know. Every year is so precious that it's really hard to sort of justify or make the case for any sort of real soft reboot or a rebuild. But in some situations, it makes some sense if you just feel like the entire rest of the roster is sort of in shambles, and you need to sort of reboot the rest of it around the quarterback to give that quarterback the opportunity. It's funny because it almost felt like they sort of tried to do that in 2016 for Tony. Yeah. And then it all flipped on its back there in Seattle, and away we go into this era of Cowboys football. So
flipped on his back is a very unfortunate use of words there, Joey, considering what happened. But I agree. I think, we're going to go through this exercise, and we'll talk a little bit about the end about, whether this is something I actually want to do or not, or if this is more just to kind of calibrate how things are going to go throughout the season from here on out. So, all right, let's just dive right into it. So, outside of Cooper and Lawrence, who are the names that we're kind of discussing ongoing with all these plans, they seem like obvious names in this exercise to kind of go. Zeke also feels like an obvious name to be moved on from the scenario, just because of the contract numbers that we see just on a very surface level. But even in this hypothetical, does it make financial sense to cut him this year?
So it sort of depends on, if the goal is to blow this thing up and sort of punt 2022 with the idea that, let's get crazy with the conspiracy theory here, with the idea that you're preparing for a 2023 season with Sean Payton as your head coach and, that sort of thing. Yeah. Then financial concern for 2022 almost becomes irrelevant. Like, you almost want to work backwards, where instead of pushing all the money out to future years, you want to pull as much of that dead money as you can forward into this year. Just take the hit, take the blow up that's going to happen, be really bad, combine a bunch of cap flexibility in the future with a really high set of draft picks in 2023, and add Sean Payton to the mix, and away you go. So yes, I think, even though cutting Ezekiel Elliott gives him a $30 million dead cap hit for the year and costs almost $12 million more to cut him than it does to keep him on the team for 2022. if you're going to rebuild this thing and blow it up with the eyes on 2023, I think, yes, you definitely consider Zeke as somebody who you would let go, just because of the fact that if you can get rid of that contract, get rid of that number, and be ready to roll into like an all-in sort of scenario for 23 and 24, the last 2 years of Prescott's current contract, then yes, you go ahead and do it. You pull all that dead money forward, just eat it for the year and sort of move forward in the future.
And so I guess the second part of my question on that would be, how would you handle that? Would you make him a June 1st cut? Would you try to spread that out over the next 2 years, or you would just try to get it all into this year and eat up as much of it as we can?
Yeah, I think because you almost have to live in this scenario in two worlds, right? Where Dak's only on a 4-year contract.
Yeah.
And if you don't show him that you are invested in trying to create an opportunity to win a championship, he has already taken cues from other quarterbacks in the league and how they handle their contract situations. He will take a cue from a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady or a whoever, and make the power play to get himself into a situation where he can win. So you almost have to just take the full brunt of it in one season, especially if you're going to cut his best friend.
Yeah.
Like, you got to take the full brunt of it in 1 year. And then we'll get to maybe a couple of his other really good buddies that may not wind up here in the future. But if you're going to do that, just go ahead and do it in this year and preserve the opportunity for the next 2 years to be that real championship window that you'll have with Dak as he will reach his 7th and 8th year in the league and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think there are obviously some other friends, as you mentioned, that may be kind of on the cutting block. Before we get into those, and we definitely will, I want to talk about Bet Online. Football season might be over, but basketball season is full steam for both pro and college hoops. Bet Online is the best spot to get all the latest odds, totals, and player performance pros for where the next fired coach is going to be. Bet Online is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. It remains the best spot for all sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline is your best source for hockey, boxing, and UFC as well. Head to the website today to use your mobile device and learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Obviously, I am a very, very veteran ad read person, so please excuse my terribleness there. But let's talk about those other names, because we said Cooper, Lawrence, those guys are obvious. Zeke is an obvious name because it just talked about all the time. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if the whole reason that Marcus even let me do this segment is just so we could talk about cutting Zeke some more. Who are some, outside of those folks, who are some other people that would be likely cut or traded, to kind of just either free up space to get draft picks or, both?
Yeah, I think one of the things you look at in this sort of scenario is anybody with any sort of age on the roster. Because if you are doing a reboot or a rebuild, the purpose is to sort of rid yourself of big contracts for older players, replace those guys with super talented, young, inexpensive players, and prepare yourself for a run in the near future. So at that point, you have to talk about the 3 veteran offensive linemen. And as I think it's almost blasphemous to talk about Zach Martin right now. So we'll leave that conversation out of it because you can't completely deplete your team. But at that point, you're left talking about the tackles, and they already seem like they've got 1.5 foot out the door with Lyle Collins anyway. So I think you probably see that move happen as well, especially considering the young and expensive offensive tackle that they have that they love currently in Terrence Steele. And so then it comes down to the Tyron Smith conversation. And I do believe that with his contract the way it is, there are some teams out there who would absolutely love to trade for Tyron Smith in his contract. I mean, a team that trades for Tyron Smith gets him for $13.5 million in 2023, and not much more than that the next year. And so I think you try to find a spot to deal Tyron Smith. You're not going to get the quote unquote value out of the situation of dealing him to get, what he's probably worth. But that's not necessarily the point here. The point is to get something in return for an asset that you're planning on moving on forward from anyway. And so you're probably going to move on from Tyron Smith and get a third or fourth round pick, or maybe a third and a fourth round pick or something like that from a team that's ready to compete right now. Maybe Andrew Whitworth retires in LA and they say, hey, we can move Tyron Smith back to LA and we'll give you picks. We know Les needs attitude towards them picks. So we make that trade, get him to LA, get him a chance to, compete for a championship while you get some return back and facilitate your rebuild going into 2023 and 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that makes a lot of sense. I also think that if you're talking about, the potential of kind of truly blowing up this situation, as much as it is blasphemous, like you said, to talk about, I think, Zach Martin is another guy that I mean, we just don't even want to say it out loud, but it is someone that is eminently tradable just because of his skill set. His contract is what his contract is, but I have a feeling that if you need a guard and Zach Martin is available, there will be interest there.
Oh, yeah,
but I also think that, this kind of shows really, and this is kind of part of the reason that we did this exercise, right? Is this kind of shows you the other side of why this is not a good thing, right? The fact that people would be lining up to go to take on that Tyron Smith contract, at this point, even with all the injury concerns, and the Cowboys have better knowledge of his medical situation than any team out there.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're wanting to hold on to this just kind of shows you just how good a contract this is, even with his injury concerns, factored into that. So, right. Is there anybody else besides the offensive linemen? I mean, those seem like when I started this and I started looking through it just really felt like obviously the offensive linemen, because of the big number and because they still have value, would be kind of culprits. But anybody else that you think that kind of just is a big red blinking light on our ledger that needs to come off for us to clear off space?
I mean, there's not really anybody else that has a big really large cap impact on the team that would be somebody that you would ship off for cap purposes, at least, to try to pull some dead hit forward and clear up some books. I mean, maybe Anthony Brown just to try to get a resource back. Maybe there's a couple of guys like that, but really, it's really those top 5 or 6 guys that
and dead money. Dead money from other players that aren't here, right?
Exactly.
That's what's taking up a lot of the cap.
Yeah. And so if you throw those guys out, throw those numbers out with those top five or 6 guys on the roster in terms of cap hit other than Dak, you really clear your books up for the next few years, and add some resources in terms of picks, hopefully. And hopefully, you wind up in a pretty good spot to add some young talent to your team and be ready to win in 2023 or 2024. But even that, I mean, if you wind up without those guys on your team, like your odds of replacing those guys with even like replacement level players is not very good. No. And the odds, at least not all of them, right? Like you may replace Zach Martin with a guard who's capable, or you may replace La'el Collins with Terrence Steele and be okay. But the odds that you replace all of those guys with replacement level, starter level players in really 2 off seasons, this off season and next off season, is pretty small. And the risk, if you don't succeed in replacing those guys, is you've slammed your own any potential championship window that you have shut, and you're looking at Dak's 10th, 11th, 12th year in the league before you're even in a position to have a chance to win. And if you get that far, you may not even have Dak on your team at that point. That's something that a lot of people have to reframe the thinking about with quarterbacks at this point.
That's a great point, and you brought up risk, and I think that leads me to kind of my next question, because you had talked, last time you were on with Marcus about the 2 paths, and I think you mentioned even early in this podcast, either you're trying to win a Super Bowl right now or 5 years from now. We know some of the pitfalls in trying to win right away and missing your target, right? You can take a cap hit. It can make your books a little bit more difficult to work on the cap the following year. There are some pitfalls to it that there's downfalls to every plan, right? But let's talk, we don't talk enough, I think, about the pitfalls of trying to institute a 5-year plan. because it's a level of assumption that it's a safe plan, like that this is there's no downfall. I mean, but to me there are pitfalls there. So talk to me about some of the pitfalls of missing your target or misjudging your target in like a long 5-year rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at a team like the Browns as an example here. It's like they went through this whole process of, completely tearing down their team, trading off everybody, letting go of everybody, reloading up with all these draft picks. They practically ran the draft for what felt like 2 or 3 years. Yeah. We feel like they have a ton of talent, and yet still they're barely playoff contenders with all this talent that they have, that every year, NFL Twitter, myself included, loves a lot of the moves that they make. Yeah. But what's the one thing that they just haven't been able to hit at the highest level? And now they're having to make another decision about it. It's the quarterback position, right? And so if you don't get the quarterback position right, none of the other stuff matters. And if you get the quarterback position right, the other stuff matters a whole lot less. And so we saw it in 2011 to 2013 with the Cowboys. That was a rebuild. Like, nobody wanted to talk about the fact that it was a rebuild, but there was a year where they ran like an undrafted free agent right guard from like some Division 2 or 3 school, David Arkin out there at one guard, and a 5th or 6th round pick at center, and just terrible on the offensive line. Yeah. That was a rebuild. They just had Tony Romo, so they won 8 games every year because they had the quarterback position right. And the risk becomes what happens with Tony Romo. They essentially, after the 2010 season, fired Wade Wilson. fired, but not. I almost said Wade Willips, which would have been interesting too.
Which would have been just a blend of the two, which would have been an interesting coach to have. I'm sorry.
For sure. They fired Wade Phillips, put Jason Garrett in, and sort of put in this long-term programmatic developmental plan of, we're going to build around Tony Romo. We're going to build the offensive line up to protect him. We're going to build a running game, those sorts of things. And then by the time you get to what should be like the crescendo of that, where you get through 2014, number 2 seed in the NFC, borderline MVP at quarterback. 2015 is supposed to be the year, right? Like, this is the year. They were a little early last year. 2015 is the year. Now the quarterback gets hurt, and now the Cowboys got extremely lucky in that situation, and that they had Dak Prescott, who we talked about it. We happened to be doing a show together for the 2016 season. So we went through that journey together a little bit of the development that Dak Prescott showed from college to the pros in year one. May be unmatched in NFL, like in NFL history as a quarterback. Josh Allen's done it through the first 3 or 4 years, but what Dak did from year in to year in +1 is just insane. And so the Cowboys got insanely lucky that their 5-year plan didn't just fall completely off a cliff in the second half of the 2010s, because they lost the quarterback that had kept them afloat. And so that's really the risk, is that you'd make all of these moves with the intention of reaching this some year in the future where you're going to win a championship, or you're going to contend for a championship. And then the NFL happens, where the injury happens, that going all in for this year, everybody says, well, what if somebody gets hurt? Or what if a referee makes a bad call? Or, if the San Francisco safety just catches the interception, the Rams aren't even in the Super Bowl, much less winning it. But that's the NFL. That's what happens in the NFL. The point is to put yourself in those games through the talent acquisition, through the team building philosophy, etc.
Yeah, there's risk on both sides. And I think that's what kind of one of the things that I wanted to just point out, is that I felt like, there's a lot of talk about, 5-year plan is sound and there's nothing wrong, but you could constantly be moving your target. You could be constantly having to readjust. And then what happens? You're just kind of constantly putting it off. You're perpetuating these 8-8 seasons while we just need to rebuild this position. And by the time you finish rebuilding that position, this position needs to be rebuilt. Right. So if you're not like focusing on all the way in right now, sometimes things can get a little bit murky because of all the things that you talked about, the way the ball bounces metaphorically and literally. So I think those are all huge things. One thing that doesn't have any risk, Joey, is Built Bar. They are delicious every single time. This is the time of year. Most people are giving up their New Year's resolutions, but not me. I am sticking strong. I am able to work out. I'm able to not eat so unhealthily at lunchtime, and that a big part of that for me is Built Bar. They have these puffs. I don't know if you've tried the puffs yet, Joey. They're so fantastic. Yet, no. The coconut marshmallow one, I mean, they are incredible. They're fluffy. They're like marshmallowy. It's like not just a protein bar. Sometimes I'll have a snack and I won't get full enough, and I want something that's delicious, and I want something that's going to keep me full until dinner time. I'll grab one of these before I work out and eat it. They're low calorie. They're high protein. They replace candy bars, which is amazing. And honestly, when you have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, it's something that you don't feel so guilty about eating at all. So with flavors like mint brownie, chocolate, coconut almond, the coconut ones are just nuts. They're my very, very favorite. I eat them for dessert sometimes. So you guys make sure you check out Built Bar and go to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. Joey, as we sum this up and kind of, bring this in, I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this, when you wrote your article, it obviously prompted an interview with Marcus we thought was really great. We wanted to talk about it. And I think the other side, and the reason I wanted to talk about the other side is because I felt like, we have a hard time when we cover these teams trying to peek through the keyholes, like what Sigmund Bloom's great phrases, and I think you had mentioned last time. I think sometimes even when we see what's on the other side of the keyhole, we don't know what we're seeing. Right. It's flashes, and that's the difficult part of peeking through keyholes, right? So sometimes it helps to get a hold of the two extremes of team building, so you can kind of triangulate where the Cowboys are, because this is the part that I kind of wanted to kind of get into. To me, and I think and tell me if you disagree, but I feel like you agree. To me, it feels like the Cowboys are trying to find some sort of middle path, right. And I don't know that that's a good idea necessarily, no. But I think that what they're trying to do is to try to find a way to have their cake and eat it too. And I think that that's a really scary way to kind of not get either, and not, just kind of get trapped in this nebulous zone where, we're rebuilding here, but we're completely all in here. So what are your thoughts on where the Cowboys are headed, based on what you've seen so far? I know we don't have a ton of information yet. We have a lot of speculation. Tell me what you think about where the Cowboys are headed, on either of these three paths, and what your general, analysis of that is.
Yeah, so I think you said it in a really great way, but I think you picked the wrong dessert. I think the Cowboys want to have their pie and eat it too.
That's that's
probably, and it comes back to, if part of this is when there's a bunch of chefs in the kitchen, right? That it's like, Jerry's got one set of priorities, Steven's got another set of priorities, Mike McCarthy has another set of priorities, and trying to get those all to align in the right way is pretty difficult, especially when you consider that that 2 of the 3 guys are the other guy's boss, and do you really expect Mike McCarthy? And there's all this business stuff about how to really generate true honesty and transparency from your employees, and how much of that really happens inside the Star. And we're not in there, so we don't necessarily know the true answer to that question. But yes, I definitely think that the Cowboys are trying to, like you said, have their pie and eat it too, and that they want to be in contention for a Super Bowl or win the division and all that stuff every year, because Jerry wants to be able to go out and sell that. And Jerry's is aging up in the world, and is he wants to win another one before he goes. And so that there's that priority. And then Stephen Jones always seems very concerned about the cap 3, 4, 5 years from now. And so there's all these conflicting priorities, and the way you said it is perfect for me. Is the most likely outcome of that is that you wind up with none of it, right? Is that you wind up paying a quarterback $40 million and still not winning a Super Bowl out of it. And then you look back at the end of his career and you do what you just did in 2015 and 2016, where you say, man, I can't believe we had that quarterback for that long, and that's all we did in that period of time. And so if that's the direction that it feels like it's headed based on, the words that we're hearing. And like you said, these are words right now, and really they're not even direct words. They're sort of implications of words and
whispers. Right?
Yeah, exactly. They're whispers and they're interpretations of statements in interviews and things like that. So over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to get a lot of action now and a lot less talking, hopefully, and be able to parse through some of it and figure out exactly what they're trying to do. But yes, it's some of this stuff. The logic is hard to follow because you don't know. One move goes towards one direction, and then the next move, the next statement feels like they're going towards another direction. It's like they talked Dan Quinn into coming back and being the defensive coordinator for another year. And then they're going to let their second best defensive player leave, or they're going to either ask their best defensive player to take a pay cut or release him. And then at the same time, going to ask their best wide receiver to leave because, whatever reason, because they don't throw him the ball enough. And so some of these things don't totally add up. And I know that, a lot of that is things like we forget that these teams, these organizations, they're just like the companies that you and I work for, right? Yep. Like they're all full of individuals with their own agendas and their own priorities and their own capabilities and their own competencies and incompetencies. And all of that stuff blends together into what we see as the outcome on the roster and on the field. And I think we underrate that a little bit sometimes as we assume these teams are full of world-class people at every level making every decision. And sometimes it's just people who used to sell insurance or be oil men who decide to get really rich and buy a football team and decide they're going to make a lot of the decisions and then hand it to their son who, et cetera. So a long-winded way to say, a lot of times it feels like with these sort of long-term planning, it almost relates back to what happens on the field is that a lot of times football coaches would rather make a decision that makes them more likely to lose later than make the decision that gives them the best chance to win the game right now. And we see people get criticized like for going for 2 when they're down by, when they're down by 9, they score a touchdown and puts them down by 9. All the numbers say go for 2 right now. Go for it right now so that if you don't get it, you can adjust later. But you'll hear like some people argue that, no, you can't go for 2 right then. You have to kick the field goal, take the point. That way you can go for 2 later. But what that does is that puts you in position to not have enough time left if you don't get that 2-point conversion to have the chance to come back and get it, to get the points you need to win. And so if you push for 5 years and you wait and then it doesn't work out in that 5th year, now what do you do? Because you're probably out of time on your quarterback and especially some of the offensive linemen and more veteran players that you have on your team. So it feels like there's a little bit of maybe a power struggle going on, and we'll see how it manifests itself over the course of the next few weeks in free agency and trades, etc.
Yeah, I think we would all just love to see some synergy, and I think you mentioned that word too, like last time we talked, and just some everyone kind of pointing in the right direction would be nice. And what we seem to be hearing, whether it's chum in the water and not true rumors, or whether it's, it's just slightly untrue, it just feels like it's very disjointed and not kind of all in one direction. So maybe they're throwing it out to try to figure out what they want to do. Maybe this is what they've decided on doing and it just doesn't make sense to us. So we'll find out a lot more soon. So
absolutely,
guys, that was a fantastic episode. We really enjoyed having Joey on. Joey, thank you so much for joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at Joey_Ickes. Joey, you have anything else you want to plug? Oh, where do you have your that article? Was that on the SI?
Yeah, it's on SI.com with Mike Fisher. He, Fish is my buddy, so he gave me a phone call and pitched this idea, and I ran with it. So we had fun. So
friend of the show, Mike Fisher. We love him too. Definitely. So yeah, definitely make sure you guys check that article out. Check out Locked On Cowboys on Twitter. Check me out at McCoolBCB. You can find us on all platforms, or go to LockedOnCowboys.com. Go check out Locked On NFL. That they're doing a great job of covering all the NFL storylines right now in the offseason. Until next time, happy trails, everybody.